great to be chairing this first panel for the second day. And we have 4 amazing people that I'm keen to introduce you to in this morning's exploration of responsibility and human-machine collaboration. So the first one is Bentley, who's here in the front row in person. So you'll see her on the screen via Zoom in a minute when she comes to have a chat with us. So she's a lecturer in AI education at King's College London. She's a member of the UKRI Trustworthy Autonomous Hub Syllabus Lab, the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms Network, and Women Reclaiming AI. And Caitlin's research has predominantly engaged with questions around how technology systems can be designed and implemented in ways that promote social inclusion, empowerment, and democratic participation. So welcome to the session, Caitlin. The second person is Dylan Cawthorne, who's in the back. He's arrived just in time. Welcome, Dylan. We've literally just started. So he's an associate lecturer at the Unmanned Aerial Systems Centre at the University of Southern Denmark. And he aims to support human flourishing through the development of ethically informed technologies. So welcome, Dylan. And we have online Keoni Mahelona, which we will switch to you in a minute, Keoni. We can't actually see you in the room here right now. He's a Chief Technology Officer at Hiku Media and a leading practitioner of Indigenous data sovereignty. Originally from Mahelona on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, Keoni has been living and working in Te Iku o Te Ika for over 10 years, having first arrived in Aotearoa as a Fulbright scholar. He's a driving force behind the development of digital innovation projects that seek to secure the future of Te Reo Maori and other Indigenous languages and makes decisions every day to protect the sovereignty of Maori data. Welcome, Keoni. And finally, we have Jurriaan van Diggelen, who's in the back corner there. Welcome, Julian, who's a senior research scientist at the Department of Human-Machine Teaming at TNO Soesterberg. He's a program leader of Defence Research Program, Human-Machine Teaming, focused on making humans collaborate with AI systems as teammates. And he leads the ELSA Lab consortium, which aims to assure ethical, legal, and societal aspects of military AI. And he's the chair of several NATO groups on meaningful human control of AI-based systems. And interestingly, this building used to be a NATO building, so it'll come full circle. So thank you very much to the 4 of you for joining us today. So the format for this session is essentially we'll have a talk from each of the speakers, and then we'll have some time for discussion in a sort of a panel format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite each of you in turn in the order that I just sort of introduced you. So Caitlin, you'll be up first. You can come up, do your thing, and then once you've all finished, we'll sit here together for those who are in the room and Keoni online. So with that, I will invite Caitlin to come and give us the first talk. Thank you, Caitlin.
Thank you, Lorenn. So in terms of the instructions for today, it was really about what are some things that would start a good conversation. So rather than a talk, I'm going to focus primarily on the questions that we're grappling with, which we don't necessarily have answers to. But just a bit about myself in this project. So I introduced a bit about intersectionality last year, but for those who weren't here, it's a theory and a practice from critical Black feminism in the US primarily about centering the voices of the most marginalized people to eradicate oppressions, just get rid of oppressions, empower people and systems to work more in the favor of everyone rather than people who tend to be advantaged and privileged in those systems. And it's really about understanding people where they are in terms of their many facets and cultures and identity characteristics. And we initially started thinking about this theory and praxis in in terms of data. And now we've gotten a project where we're focusing on how this can be applied in the context of intersectional trustworthy autonomous systems. And today, since we're focusing on human-machine collaboration, part of this work is focusing on remotely operated boats. There we go. And so I just wanted to bring to your attention that this is a picture that was taken from the World Economic Forum's website about this magical future in which remotely operated boat control centers would exist. Well, they do exist already, but this is sort of depicting what it might look like in the future. And we can see here that it's, you know, it looks sort of like a Star Trek ship bay where you've got lots of dashboards and things going on, some interfaces that are within reach. It's a white man sitting there, he's alone in some nondescript location. And so our work is really about questioning what it might look like if we include more people who have historically been excluded from the maritime sector. And there's a lot of there is a lot of historical inequality in the maritime sector. If you can imagine things like going off onto boats for months at a time restricts people who might have caring responsibilities or can't be away from their families for long periods of time. There's reportedly a lot of mental health issues from spending that amount of time on a ship. There's a lot of physical needs, so people with disabilities have also been excluded. But then also, if you can see with all these dashboards, we're also concerned about neurodiversity and what impacts sort of having all this information coming at you might entail as well. And so for us, the way that we are applying intersectionality to investigate this issue is trying to think about how we can align the creation of the design and deployment of remotely operated boats with the mission to reduce inequality in the maritime sector. So not just how can we design a remotely operated ship, but how will we know if we're making the working as a seafarer more inclusive and just. And I think for today, I think I'd really like to focus on the second and third aspect in terms of how do we include people who have been excluded from the design and deployment of remotely operated ships in our methods of researching human-machine collaboration. There was a fascinating article recently from another member of the TAS Hub named Katie Parnell, and she just sort of listed off all of the problems with typical human factors research that we might see. It might be inclusive to our bodies. If we're wearing makeup, some of the face tracking software doesn't work. A lot of other types of simulation techniques are built for different types of bodies than we might have. So we're trying to think a bit about not only how do we include women or people with disabilities into our research, but also how can we do that research differently? And I think I'll probably stop there and hope we can pick up the discussion in a bit.
Great, thank you so much, Caitlin. And I'm sure we'll be picking up a lot of these threads in the discussion that's about to happen at the end. So Dylan, would you like to come up next? Liz will just sort out the tech part for us, which is great, and share some of your thoughts.
I'm probably going to wander around while I see.
Please do.
Might be good to just point that in this direction.
There's another. Oh yes, that's it.
Cameras everywhere. Dailies. Being watched.
There's many options here. Oh yeah, it is looking at you. That's good. We can see if this clicker will work. That's
Oh, yeah.
going around.
Yeah, and if I talk too long, just give me the
I'll give you
the music.
the music.
Play
Oh,
me
dear.
off.
Does that mean I'd have to sing?
Whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. Okay. Let's see if this is gonna work. Right. Doesn't seem to want to work. Sorry about that. We're just making promises we can't keep.
It's switched on.
It's switched on, yeah. I think it's something to do with the USB. Okay, sorry.
That's all right. I can do more things.
All right. Take us away, Dylan. Thank you.
All right, yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good to see you again. Yeah, I'm Dylan Cawthorne. I'm an associate professor at the University of Southern Denmark, which is in the central part of Denmark. And yeah, I'm a drone engineer. So I'm a mechanical engineer. And these last several years, I've done my PhD. And the last many years have been about researching ethics and how we can use value-sensitive design to create better technologies. So to me, value-sensitive design is about incorporating ethics and technology together to inform the design. And I use it in a very broad sense with a capital V. I know sometimes value-sensitive design can be quite, I would say, focused and instrumental, like how do we improve this robot-human interaction? But to me, it's very broad. It's like, what are the justice issues? What are the equality issues? Transparency? What is the future that we're creating? These kind of things. And I also like to use this value-sensitive alternative approach, which is we can always choose not to make things. So we as engineers and we as a society can always say we will opt out of this. So I'm going to try and talk very quickly about responsibility and how my work with drone design has been informed by responsibility issues. Nothing's responding.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I just said that. And I think this is, about putting ethics into practice. And I will sort of allude to this. I think given the way that things are currently going and the way that we currently do engineering, we need to kind of jump the tracks and go in quite a different direction. And in some cases, people would characterize that as engineering activism. And so I would consider myself one of those people. Yeah, very broadly, I would say this is my perception of what engineering and ethics is. Engineering is what we can do, and ethics is about what we should do. And we need to join these two because for a long time, engineers have just been doing stuff and saying, look at this amazing thing we can accomplish. And the ethicists have been sitting in their offices thinking like, oh, the drones are evil and all this kind of stuff. And they haven't been talking together. This is something about responsibility. I think some of the important features that it has is, we can always choose to take on a bit more responsibility than we're required to choose, than we're required to take on. And that's basically what I'm going to focus on is like the taking on of a bit more responsibility than is necessary. And also to remind people that normally we think about responsibility in a negative sense, like it's like blaming someone, but it can also be interpreted in a positive sense. So if someone makes a technology that does something positive, we can also think about praiseworthiness as well. So on to some engineering. I've made a number of prototype drones over the last couple of years, trying to explore different ethical principles and ideas. This is a teleoperated healthcare drone that I developed some years ago during my PhD research. And it explores a lot of different things about trust and responsibility and justice. I created an ethical framework together with my mentor, Amy van Weinsberg at TU Delft in the Netherlands. And so that was looking at all kinds of different ethical stuff. This is another one. It's a telepresence search and rescue drone. So the idea is that the drone will land and then you will be able to communicate directly with a human that can give you aid and psychological and physical aid. And again, this is another telepresence system. When you look at some of the ethical implications of remotely operated systems and autonomous systems, I think one way to deal with those issues is to not have them. So stop making things autonomous. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to discuss that opinion in a moment. Yeah, and I'm also very interested in who is technology benefiting. So what about the justice issues? And yesterday there was some amazing stuff that we saw, and I was just thinking, wow, this is wonderful, but who's getting access to this? Who is benefiting from this? What about we're the 1%? We're the rich ones in the world globally. We have a lot of power in this society, and what about the rest? How are they going to benefit from AI? Are they going to benefit from drones? So I did this project. I was just in Sierra Leone 2 months ago, and I made a bamboo drone that the students there could make, which could be used for mapping and land rights issues. And yeah, this is an amazing workshop because we can also discuss art a little bit. And yeah, I've also worked a bit with art. Sometimes I make art pieces. And I find it very useful because then we can sort of explore the boundaries of what different futures could look like, different possibilities. I think sometimes engineering, like after my PhD, my brain was just saturated with solving things and being very practical, and I could just feel it. Something was going to go wrong very quickly if I didn't do something creative and something that broke things and didn't follow the rules. So this is one of the pieces that I made after that, and it's a spiritual drone, so it carries sage over the community, and you fly it like a kite. So it's remotely operated in that it still has a cord. But I think also drones with cords are pretty nice. If you ever see a drone, you're like, who's responsible for that? You just follow the cord down. Very simple. So maybe we just need to go old school. And then yeah, these are just some general reflections about what are we doing as far as responsibility goes with technology development in general. There's been a lot of discussion about drones and conflict these days, especially. And I've been thinking about how much are we investing in peace compared to how much are we investing in war? Where are the technologies of peace? Yeah, what about the environment? What is our responsibility towards the environment and towards also the poor and future generations? So yeah, what the decisions we're making today are going to set the direction that we go in the future, and what about the people that come after us? So yeah, now call to action for all of us here. What responsibility do you have, and what responsibility can you choose to take on? So my people are engineers. So what I'm trying to do is affect them and convince them, okay, I know that you think that you just work in a very technical field, but you can also, appreciate that your technology is going to have impacts on humans. Learn a bit more about ethics, learn a bit more about social impacts of technology, and then you can choose to take on and be a bit more proactive in this responsibility taking. Yeah, so that's it. And I have to promote my book. So it's coming out in summer. And it's called The Ethics of Drone Design, which goes into more detail about this kind of stuff. Yeah, thank you.
Great. So thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to the discussion more and more as we hear from each person. So the next person is going to be Keoni, who's online. Just one sec, Keoni, as we work through getting you visible. And in a minute, you should be able to share your slides, but just one sec.
I don't think.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you.
Cool.
Great. And you don't have slides or anything, right? You're gonna.
No, I don't. I didn't really prepare any slides. I'm sorry.
No, there's no need to. And in fact, that's great because we can see you full screen. So cool. Go right ahead, Keoni.
Sweet. Aloha ka ko noho I hao Keoni ko uinoa ko te siti o te rewirirangi o te Hiku o te ika. Hi everyone, my name's Keoni. I'm from Hawaii, as you would have heard, and you would also heard that I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Hiku Media. Responsibility. Well, we have a lot of responsibility in our organization. So I guess I should quickly let you know who we are at Hiku Media. So we started out as a radio station in 1990 with a mission to assist in the revitalization of Te Reo Māori, which is the indigenous language of Aotearoa. Since then, we've had a television station on the old sort of terrestrial bunny ears televisions back in the day. We had this thing called the digital switchover, which kind of killed bunny ear television. And then we had to move online. So we pivoted to having online TV and media. And now we have this sort of digital platform, which is how we reach our audience and the iwi members who associate, that is the tribal members who associate with our organization. Ever since moving digitally, we've had to really consider the issues around data sovereignty. that is the rights that we sign away to our data when we upload them into digital platforms owned predominantly by foreign corporations, most of which are based in the United States of America. For example, when you upload content to YouTube, you sign your rights over to YouTube for your content. That just didn't jive with us here in Aotearoa, and certainly for many Indigenous people. So we had to build our own platform from the ground up. Since building our own platform, we've realized there's a lot of great technology out there, such as machine learning, that can really enhance what we do at our organization to help us achieve our mission of revitalizing Te Reo Māori. More recently, tools like automatic speech recognition, speech synthesis, natural language processing, which has all been enabled through machine learning, quote unquote, artificial intelligence, has really opened some amazing opportunities for Indigenous people to assist not only in the revitalization of their languages, but also to ensure that their worldviews, their culture, and their languages have a place in this future, which is very much becoming a digital future. Unfortunately, this future is also very much becoming dominated by the ultra wealthy. And what I mean by ultra wealthy is I mean corporations such as OpenAI, Google, Amazon, who've got such extreme amounts of wealth that they can train extremely large models because they have the money, they have the compute, they've scraped as much data as they could from the public domain online to train these models. Now they're saying they're democratizing AI by giving us all access, rather giving us the privilege of having access to the tools that they deem are suitable to be open to the public. But I don't think they understand the negative implications of just scraping data from the web, training models, and then making it openly accessible. So one issue, for example, is they've scraped a lot of Indigenous data and have since included this Indigenous data in some of their models, and then opened up these models for anyone, free for the taking. We all know what happens. Well, many Indigenous people knew what happened, when it was the Wild West and land was free for the taking. We pretty much got all our land taken from us. And now we're in the final frontier of colonization, which is the imperialist nations and corporations are grabbing as much data as they can online to build these AI models in the race for AI. And that's quite concerning. It's quite a grim future, I think, in my humble opinion. Anyways, we take a different approach to data and artificial intelligence. We respect data in the same way that we should respect our environment. And had we respected our environment over the last couple of centuries, we might not have this problem called climate change. But because we didn't respect our environment, we're in a very bad situation in terms of the climate. We are just asking people to respect data, to treat data as what we call a taonga, that is a treasure, something that we value. And if we can respect data, then we can ensure that the tools we build using that data might actually do more good than harm in the future. So we talk about responsibility, but at the end of the day, who will hold you accountable for your responsibility? Unfortunately, many of these big techs are accountable to shareholders. They are accountable to returning wealth to people who probably don't need any more wealth. So there's an inherent problem with the system that we can't really fix unless we throw capitalism out the door. I don't know if that's happening soon. So until then, I'm advocating that big tech, that everybody respect data and treat data like we would our own family, our friends, our communities, and our environment. And by doing that, we might assume the responsibility that we have when looking after data and training models with data, and hopefully we can have a more positive future. Aloha.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Keoni. And now we have Jurriaan as our last provocateur. Everyone start looking for questions because we'll be turning to the broader discussion after. No, it's not. Sorry.
A minute more. Takes a minute. Okay.
Yes, okay. I'll start right away. Which no, it doesn't switch the slides.
Okay. Hold on.
Use that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want the two?
Yeah, okay. So this picture is developed by Merel Ekelhoff and colleagues from the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research. And it shows that a morally sensitive activity, in this case, attacking the target, a military target, never takes place in isolation. So what we see where the moral activity takes place is usually the tip of the iceberg, but many processes on a strategic, operational, and tactical level, and also political level, have preceded that event, and many people were also involved there. And in fact, these icebergs, they are everywhere. Each of the organizations is in fact an iceberg. For example, in the recruitment systems, you can say that this is where people hire and reject job applicants. And they are usually emotionally involved while doing that, and they show compassion for the people that they work with. But behind it, there's the whole organization that devises the rules and trains the people and staffs the organization. It can also be the soldiers on the ground that participate in violent behavior, or in the hospitals, the doctors that have direct contact with their patients. Well, we're interested in AI. What would happen if we deploy AI in organizations? This is the AI takeover scenario where everyone is replaced by an AI agent. And this is usually the scenario that nobody wants, because we are uncomfortable when there are no humans involved. We want humans to be responsible for moral decision making, and we want also humans to be involved for in any form of moral decision making. This is also called meaningful human control. There's a lot of attention to that topic, which basically means that we demand that only humans take moral decisions and not AI agents. There's a lot of activism around that. We don't want machines to decide who gets killed. On the United Nations level, there are big discussions going on trying to ban these sort of weapon systems. There is a project, a lot of scientific projects also focusing on other domains, trying to achieve meaningful human control. And usually what we see happening is that we end up with a situation like this, where the front workers are replaced with AI, so the recruitments, the automatic CV scanners, or the robots on the battlefield, or in the hospitals, the direct contact with patients can be done by AI. But behind there are still people in the organization. And the people, they set the parameters for these AI systems. They fed the AI systems with training data, and they have these prefab plans. So this is, the claim is that it's under meaningful human control, because it's some kind of prior control that the human executes over these AI systems. When we look at the emotions, we see that the people that have direct contact with the emotionally sensitive, with a morally sensitive event are gone and are replaced. So it's becoming a little bit of a cold organization, because these people that are in control and can be held responsible, they are desk workers and they're setting parameters, they're doing math, and that's different activities. So what we see, human emotions are going out of the organization, and you can ask yourself the question, is it a good thing or a bad thing? It's a subtle answer. It could lead to worse decisions, of course. Emotions, you run the risk of PTSS when you have soldiers on the ground, and it's difficult to standardize emotions. But on the other hand, we know that emotions is an essential component of moral decision making. You cannot make moral decisions when you are totally emotionally disengaged with the task. Because in psychology, there's this whole, also a system 1, system 2 theory. It teaches us that it activates intuition, and it also stimulates engagement. So when you regret an action afterwards, you are motivated to do better next time. So the task is to bring back emotions somehow. And we have some ideas about that, how you can do that, such that there are still people, even when they're working in the back, emotionally involved. And one of the reasons how you can do that is with immersion, and that can be narrative immersion or a visual immersion, and even immersion with smell and heat, etc. And these are some setups that we have in our lab in Soesterberg. So the conclusion is, when you want to have meaningful human control without any form of of emotional engagement, it's not meaningful. And the other one is that emotional engagement cannot taken be granted in a highly technological environment. So that's my finishes my talk.
Fabulous. Great. So I invite Caitlin and Dylan to come. Maybe go one across, because
Okay.
you'll be more in the view,
All
and
right.
I'll be less in the view. Is
Okay.
good. Hopefully.
And
We're
Keoni,
gonna
you're
do
back up on the
some musical
screen.
chairs in a minute. Great. Fabulous. Okay, so hopefully, is this okay video wise?
Yeah.
Because we also have Keoni online, so we just want to make sure. Perfect. Oh, we can see you well, Keoni, so hopefully you can see us too. There we go. Wonderful. Okay, well, so we have a good 20 minutes or so to have a discussion based on these provocations. And so I'm going to turn to everyone to ask questions in a minute. So while you're thinking about that, and also in the chat, we'll be monitoring the questions. But I'm really keen to sort of pull through some of the common threads through all of the discussion, the provocations that we've had today, of which I think there are many. So this is really meant to be a discussion amongst yourselves as well, but I'll just put something in there to get things started, and then we'll turn to everyone if you have questions for the whole group to discuss, or for specific people, that's also welcome. So one thing that I noticed from listening to all of the provocations is, broadly speaking, there's sort of calls to change how we think and do. So in your case, Jurriaan, moving away from non-emotional to including the emotion. In your case, Caitlin, including those that have traditionally been excluded. For you, Dylan, this whole concept of how do we move from just being about blame and liability to also praiseworthy sort of approaches to thinking about responsibility. And Keoni, this idea of respect for data and sort of moving away from extraction to actual respect in how we do things. So I'm curious from a broader systems perspective, what you think needs to happen for these sorts of changes to really take place, to actually be the way that we do things. What needs to happen in the broader system to enable these sorts of changes that you're discussing to happen? So I'm curious, and whether there might be some commonalities between the different threads. So that's my provocation back. Did anyone want to sort of kick off what some of the things that you need to see changed for these visions that you have for the future to come to life?
Yeah, I have some thoughts. So the first thing, of course, which you already mentioned, is that we should look at the broader system, which they usually do not do, because still things are engineered and just focusing on your little robot, and then then it goes off in the world and people see how they will use it. But we should really focus on people who use it, people that are affected by the technology, and also the context in which it is used. And then the second thing is that I think it will be very difficult in such a complex dynamic system to predict everything beforehand. So we should really see out how it plays out in practice and keep on monitoring during the entire life cycle of the product, and also have the ability to steer it in the right direction when it turns out that it gets negative impact on the society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess I also, as Keoni mentioned, I'm very skeptical of the economic system. I think it's just going to continue to consolidate wealth and power. And I think that we as engineers are actually facilitating that. So I feel a bit of responsibility when that happens, because I am an engineer. So what I'm trying to do is, reach out to that subset of people and try to make arguments for why they could have a more holistic perspective, work a bit more interdisciplinarily to understand what's going on with ethics and these other things. And I think a lot of this wouldn't be able to take place without engineers. The things the impacts that we see on the climate, of course, all the great things about that we were able to do with technology is also facilitated through technology, but also all the harms. So I think that we need to be on board for the good stuff and off-board for the bad stuff.
Well, thank you both for going first. So now I have 3 points that I've thought about carefully before speaking. So the 3 things at a systems scale that I can see from what we're working on. The first is that our project is situated in a wider program of research, and they have emphasized responsible research and innovation for all of the projects, which I think has made a real difference. And it typically tends to involve anticipating consequences, a lot of what you've spoken about, social inclusion, and also developing connections with or strengthening relationships between people that your research is affecting, and also building into your work some kind of impact assessment. And then the second thing is that we have a strong focus on developing partnerships with both industry and government. And I think that has made a huge difference for us, having the Maritime Coast Guard Agency really spearhead this work, share their knowledge, and agree to test and implement what we're developing. So it motivates us and makes us feel like it's making a difference in that sense. And then the third part, oh shoot, now I've already yeah. Partners, and then yeah, I'll stop there.
You can
If I remember, then yeah, starting.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I think we need to change the incentive system. I mean, humans are pretty basic. We like pleasure. We like to do the things that fire the happy spaces in our brains. And unfortunately, the society we live in, values wealth and the self and the individual. So unless we can change those inherent problems in society, I think it's going to be really hard to get people to assume responsibility for their actions. I mean, yeah, technology is good, but I mean, how many centuries has it been? And we still have the same problems that we've had 2,500 years ago. And so we can say, yeah, technology has enabled all these things, but as a society, as a people, we just keep repeating the same things. If anything, technology is enabling us to repeat our problems at a faster pace. And so, yeah, I'm just real cynical devil's advocate. Well, I'm from Hawaii, and our entire nation has been taken from us from the United States of America. But yeah, we need to change the incentive system. I think that's the only way people are going to assume responsibility, and they need to think beyond themselves. There's a lot of me, myself, and I in Western society. Whereas, in other cultures, especially indigenous ones, it is very much about the community, and our environment is part of our community as well. In certain nations, they've personified the river, because by personifying the river, all of a sudden human rights apply to the river. So now we can't pollute the river because we're treating it like a human. So little things like that, I think, can help us to sail in the right direction. But I think there's a lot of inherent things that really need revolutionary change if we want us to really assume responsibility with humans and machines.
So it's a large and gnarly challenge ahead. I can see there's a few comments coming through in the chat, and I'm curious if anyone in the room has a question. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. Simon, do you want to ask your question to the panel, and then we'll go to someone online. So I'll draw on you, Kathy, perhaps to ask a question from the online.
Sure. I'm Simon McKenzie from Griffith University. So really 4 really interesting presentations, lots to think about and like to ask. Many questions, but I'll stick with one. Dylan, you bring in sort of ethics into the design of drones. Are you taking a particular ethical model or sort of approach, or is it sort of open to taking on board other, thinking about Keoni's presentation where he has sort of articulated what Indigenous approaches to data sovereignty might bring. I wondered how rigid you are about the sort of ethical frameworks that you're applying in your drone design.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the benefits and drawbacks of value-sensitive design. It normally doesn't have any kind of fixed moral or normative approach, but you can use different ones. So in the healthcare drone, we used one very Western, like bioethics type stuff, beneficence, non-maleficence, autonomy, justice, and we added explicability. It could be very interesting to work with indigenous values for sure. We've also we haven't realized it yet, but we've been discussing how we could make a feminist drone, or like investigate the intersection between feminist sort of normative approaches and drone technology, see if maybe they don't even fit at all through art. So I think that honestly, I'm not even that concerned about what normative framework you use. Just use one, be explicit about it, and and then I think that would be a massive improvement.
Thank you for that question.
I remembered my third point.
Great. And yeah, feel free to jump in other panelists if you have something to add to the questions. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one.
But I think the third point also relates to this question about operating within the system or operating at the margins. And I think it is just that the being bold enough to recognize that something that is completely reimagined could actually be more effective. But I do think, and I'll give you the example of, so what happens right now in maritime training, for example, is you take like a cadetship, which is a very structured program to become a seafarer. And now with these remotely operated ship training remote control centers, then we have the opportunity to create a different kind of apprenticeship program, which doesn't follow the same kind of training path as before. And through an apprenticeship program, they can kind of have a stronger feedback loop between the environment in which their work is happening and their needs as a worker. But it doesn't change the fact that, yes, that these are companies that still have to offer their services to provide that training in some way or to structure the program. But I think like little by little, if we can try and think about being bold and taking a bit of risks to do things a bit differently, maybe not in everything that we do, but in key areas or key intervention points, then it can help to slowly break down those capitalist systems. I don't know, but my example doesn't do that, but I'm just mean that approach might help. Sorry.
Great, thank you. I'll pause there. Kathy, do you want to ask a question from online, please?
Thanks so much, Lorenn. I'd actually like to pass to a participant, Maria Camilla Piazza, and invite her to ask a question.
Perfect.
We hope this connection holds, and if it doesn't, you've got it on text. So I was really interested in the connection between autonomy and inclusivity. And so I'd like to put forth a thesis and hear what you have to say about this. I think that the research in autonomous robots, if it's done well, not cutting corners, will necessarily foster an improvement and inclusivity.
Maria Camilla has just frozen there. So what I'd like to do is just read out the question there. And so her thesis is around, if done well, research in autonomous robots will foster improvement in inclusivity because the technical effort is essentially our species learning how to partner with another intelligence that has a different embodiment, different strengths and different weaknesses, and an intrinsic alienness, all the while learning how to understand ourselves better as humans in the sense of how we work. And Maria Camilla is hopeful that this large-scale effort to operate well with something other, capital O, other than us, will lead to contextualizing the human differences in human-human relationships in a more positive light. And her question for the panel is, do you see this as a possible future? And if not, what do you think will prevent it?
It's an interesting thought. I guess my response would be, why not just go directly to fostering human-human interaction? I mean, it sounds nice, but it sounds a bit indirect. I mean, why not just work with people that are around us? Why not apply these same, the same effort to, nurturing the environment? And yeah, to me, it seems like a diversion.
Yeah, so I think that I mean, we are the ones that are designing these technologies, and we can use it in a good way and in a bad way. So I like the optimistic scenario that you sketched. I think it can. I think particularly when you have like a feedback system, that an AI that gives feedback on your own behavior and teaches you to behave and become the person that you want to become. I think there are some opportunities there, but then on the other hand, you can also use it the other way and become more rich and use those kinds of systems to have values that in the end will not lead to an overall better society. So I think it will be a challenge to make sure that we are going to use it in the right way. But I agree with you that it can be very powerful.
Keoni, do you want?
There's assuming some level of intelligence, right? I think, and looking at how we're currently training models, there's a lot of bias in these models, right? Because they're scraping data from biased sources. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So I wonder, if in these future AIs, if they're literally pulling just biased data, can we actually teach it new things? Can it actually learn to work with us and grow and adapt? Will their neural networks have some plasticity, or will it be sort of ingrained in the biases that it was trained on? So I think before we even get there, we need to consider the fact that, currently the way in which sort of big tech are training these models doesn't really, in my opinion, lend itself to this sort of positive sort of interaction with machines where we learn from each other. So that's my concern with that. The other thing is, talking about sort of remote operation of machines, you're so far removed from the environment. I mean, this is no different than a company, say a Japanese company owning a forestry, having a forestry business here in New Zealand. They're not aware of the environmental impacts of having that forest, what happens when they cut it down, sort of the risks for the workers that are like, Maori people are dying in this industry of logging industry. But when the people who own the forest are so far removed from the environment, they can't empathize with the problems, or they probably don't care because it's not in their own backyard. So one problem I see with this sort of, human machine interactions and remote operations of machines is, how do we actually make these how do we enable that remoteness to put that person more in the place of where the machine operates, to let them empathize more? I mean, even today, because of COVID, we're having to conduct our businesses online through Zoom. Like, we still miss a lot from that face-to-face real world interaction. Like, Zoom and Slack cannot replace certain things. And I think we need to be very cognizant of that. And when we're building machines, we need to remember, like, the problems that we're facing now in this sort of virtual world, trying to interact as humans. And now we're trying to get a machine which doesn't have as many sensors as a human does. And how do we sort of foster that or prevent that sort of lack of input from the environment from negatively affecting how we build machines and how they respond to us?
And is that really connected to the emotion part?
Yes, I recognize a lot in what you are saying, and indeed, you run the risk that this AI will increase the moral distance to what activities the AI is undertaking. But on the other hand, then there's this opportunity that you can use technology to make the effects of what you are doing in the forest, and that the forest is dying, and the effects on the animals and the people, to make them visible, and to allow the decision maker, the human decision maker far away, to experience the results. But they have to be open for that. But I think we can stimulate that more, and we can do better there. That it's less from a distance.
Great. I'll take another question from the room if there is one, and I think there's one more in line. There isn't.
any questions in the room? We've got about another 10 minutes. So, Alexis.
It will be a little bit politically incorrect.
Great.
So
We look forward to this, Alex.
I do not express. No? I'm sorry that I have to go away, so I missed part of the discussion. No? But at a certain point, you said there is a difference between what we can do and what we should do. Okay. Now, my question is, who defines what we should do? Because what we can do is very much a matter of, let's say, technical constraints. What we should do is very much a matter of values, and values are subjective. So who tell us what we should do?
Yeah, so
how do we define that?
I don't know if I agree that values are subjective. I think that many people have argued that there's a certain level of universality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To human values. Yeah, you know. So I would tend towards that direction.
Historically, they have never been. They have never been objective values. There have always been only subjective values. I don't know in the human history of something that has been universally valid.
Maybe it would be good to take this up with an ethicist, not an engineer. But
that is an amazing question. I mean, like he's really nailed it, hasn't he? That is such a good question, and I agree with you. I mean, sure, there are some universal values, but how do we apply those values? And what are the stories that led to us having those values, right? I mean, just look at religion and the wars created because of religion. You know, in theory, they have similar values, but they still want to have wars because, you know, they have some differing ideas on maybe the genesis of their values. What we should do, right? And that's the problem, is that there are a lot of people who feel like they're doing the right thing. They are democratizing AI, and this is for the greater good. And you know, and then we have our effective altruism people who are funding a lot of open AI and other sort of AI research. But that really is the problem, is what should we do? And that changes person to person. And it's kind of why we're in the mess we are in. And how do you fix that? Education, I would hope. But, you know, you can also educate people in the wrong way. You know, we have, for example, China re-educating the Uyghur people. So yeah, it's such a, it is really it is an amazing question, but no one's clearly solved it. We haven't solved it in, you know, thousands of years. Hopefully we solve it soon.
So can I say something? So this is essentially what we grapple with, and what I was trying to pick up on also in terms of our methods. And the underlying assumption with participatory methods is that they would enable you to surface some of these shoulds around the design and deployment of robots or trustworthy autonomous systems, in terms of including those people who these systems affect, whether in their environment or through their work or in their communities. So strengthening the relationships between the technology that we build and the people that it affects the most by including them. But the problem with that assumption is that participatory methods are the most effective way to do that, which is problematic because you tend to not have enough people in the room to kind of use statistical methods, or often you'll hear that people don't know what they want, or so you end up having to think a bit more broadly about, well, how do you help people to consider these decisions that might not be about whether you put a bolt here or there or an interface here or there, but what it means to them more broadly, which is sort of why we're developing a game to engage people in these questions rather than asking them to use a simulator sit somewhere and see how it feels, sort of thing. But then we also want to consider different ways of engaging communities at different stages of a design or deployment cycle. So it could be having a town hall meeting. It could be having an advisory panel of experts, of ethicists and engineers all together, multidisciplinarity, who could have more of an emotional or empathetic connection to those communities. But yes, I would say thinking more explicitly about strengthening relationships between technology and people in terms of the things that affect them the most. That's my short answer.
I think I agree with that. So the stance that I usually take is that, I mean, we don't know what are the right values, because they have been changing throughout history, and they will probably change in the future. And in the future, we'll probably look back at our values today and say we're totally immoral. But we can, when developing technology, we must make sure that whatever we develop is that this technology behaves aligned with our values, whatever these values are. And that problem of value alignment, whether that is putting ethics, programming the ethics in the machine itself, or whether doing it via group machine interaction, it needs to be implemented and it needs to be engineered, and we should be careful about that.
Sorry, I do want to add, I do have a good concrete example, more of instead of my sort of philosophical rambling in terms of what we should do. So what we do in terms of language revitalization, what we're advocating for is that the language communities themselves should decide what gets to happen with their language and their language data. The Hawaiian people should decide whether their language should be in duolingual. That is not for duolingual to decide. That is not for a non-Hawaiian who wants to learn Hawaiian, who feels it should be in duolingual because it would make their language learning journey easier. It is absolutely up to those people. The Uyghur language, right? It is up to the Uyghur people to decide whether their language data should be in Common Voice on Mozilla's platform. They feel that their language is at risk at being extinct because of what China is doing and re-educating their young kids. So they absolutely feel their language data should be in the public domain. We should be making NLP tools to preserve the Uyghur language. It is for those people to decide. So in terms of what should we do, sometimes you shouldn't do anything if it is not your responsibility to make decisions on behalf of a community or a people. If you have no connection to that community or people, you shouldn't be making decisions on their behalf. I think that is a pretty universal, time-independent theory that we should apply.
Can I be nasty on that point? No. Communitarism is extremely expensive and at the long term unsustainable, which means that the value of, let's say, pursuing the survival of indigenous language is unaffordable for the whole society in itself. So what do we choose? Do we choose to preserve communities, or do we choose to preserve our planet?
We need both.
Yeah, I don't see how those are mutually exclusive.
Our planet is based on the fact that something dies so that something else can get better. So we have to kill something so that something else lives. So we have to decide, what do we kill? No, I'm voluntarily very provocative on this, no? Because we are in front of making big choices, no? It's not that I'm not for preserving the right of indigenous people of having whatever, no? But we have to think, no, that this is not on long term something which is sustainable. Sustainability, we'll talk about it, means also allowing things dying. Because there is an end for everything, including native languages.
That is true. But it is up to those people to decide what they want. It's not up to other governments and other peoples. And if we continue to fight for what we want,
they will
then
never
we will,
decide.
right?
They will never decide for that.
I mean, there are a lot of things that can die. I mean, there's imperialist nations, right? But that's a different discussion.
Well, there's so many discussions that we could move into from this topic. It's been a juicy one. I'm sure that we've missed a couple of questions online. Liz, could you just because do we have another 5 minutes if there is a question online? Because I feel like we've neglected the people online a little bit.
We don't actually have any other questions online. We had a comment about data-centric AI from Maria Camilla, but it was more a comment than a question. So I am conscious of the schedule.
Right.
Why don't we give people, the panelists, a chance to make one last final?
There's one more question over there.
Dee has her hand up.
Oh.
So, but then, yes, I think that's a great idea. So Dee, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I just have a quick one for Keoni because I'm hoping it's...
Oh, you might have to come up here, sorry, just so we can all hear. Just bringing the questioner to the front of the room for those online.
Yeah, a question for Keoni, and it was just based on the fact that the people should be deciding, but often it's not the whole people and the community. So I was just wondering from your perspective, who would be the spokesman that would be deciding for that community about whether they should have the language on there or not?
Yeah, and that then turns to the internal politics of that community. And that is a great point and a great question. Because, you know, there might have been a small group of Hawaiians who said, yes, Duolingo should have Hawaiian, but do they speak on behalf of the entire group of Hawaiians? Likewise, you have that across other indigenous cultures. So, right, who is the spokesperson, the spokespeople of that community? And that is, that's so now you're getting into indigenous politics, which is a whole nother discussion. You know, in terms of how we look at it, we see, you know, who has mana, as some of you might be aware if you play video games, or the authority in the community. And often that authority is granted because of your knowledge or because of your service to the community. So in our approach, we will seek out those who we know who have served and who have the wisdom to make critical decisions. And so often we look to our elders to guide us in making important decisions like that. But yeah, that is a very good point. It's easy if you're not part of that community, because then you can say, no, I don't have a say and you should go and talk to them. But then you have to let them figure out who gets to speak on their behalf. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So we might do a quick, if you have a final comment, question, thought, and then we'll be wrapping up this session, which has been really wide-ranging, and hopefully we'll pick up some of the threads in some of the panels and talks going forward today. So I might start with you, Jurriaan. If you've got a final thought or comment that you would just want to, or question or provocation that you want to leave.
Yeah. I think as a field to have impact, we should also detect what are the relevant issues that are really new with respect to introducing these new technologies, and be careful not to make our field so broad that it includes the whole ethics of humanity, because then you know, it will just be too difficult to make an impact then.
Caitlin.
Yeah, I want to thank Alexi for those, controversial comments. But I think you had mentioned the responsibility as you or something. Was that it? Responsibility as seeing what is your responsibility. And I think it's crucial that we each need to, you know, do things in our own little world, but understand where it fits in that constellation of what is the wider issues or decisions that need to take place, and how our work fits into that wider body of stuff, politics, what have you, sustainability, and I think that's the thing that I most appreciate of working within the TAS hub, is that there is this dimension of what do we stand for as a group of researchers across the nation, and how can we move together in that way? And a lot of it is about thinking very critically about how we approach our research and the people that we're working with and how we do that.
Dylan.
Yeah, so I think this discussion about human values is really important, but I actually don't think we're there yet. At least from my perspective, in the engineering community, we're still discussing people. The majority of engineers do not even see values playing a role. So I would love to, we should figure out what are the good values and what are the good things that we want to achieve. Definitely, but the first step is admitting that there's a connection between the two. And it's crazy to say, especially with the people in this room, because I'm sure we all would agree that the connection is obvious, but we're not even there yet. So I think first we need to establish that there is this connection, and then we can talk about the important stuff about that.
Thanks for bringing us back to ground. And Keoni.
Kia ora. I mean, my background is engineering. I think engineers need a more well-rounded and holistic education. You can't compartmentalize yourself. You can't ignore your values. You can't ignore the current geopolitics that are going on. Like, everything we do at our organization has to focus around absolutely everything that's going on. What's big tech doing in AI? What's the geopolitics between China and America? Because that affects us as a small country, New Zealand, kind of sitting in the middle. So I think we need to continue and strive to be holistic thinkers. Whether you're an engineer, a data scientist, an artist, you absolutely need to think big picture as best as you can, or build a team around you that can help fill the gaps where you're missing. We also need a lot of diversity. We need diversity in our teams. The comment earlier about sort of things die and grow, et cetera. What makes this planet so amazing is the diversity, where it's diversity in our ecosystems, diversity in our languages, who we are as individuals. That's what's exciting about it, right? So we need to think, how do we preserve this diversity and enable it to sort of interact in a holistic way, and a way where we can all sort of work together and not just have to all conform to sort of, whatever is popular for today on TikTok.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone. Would you join me in thanking the panelists for a great one? And I'll hand over to Liz for the next session.
Thank you, Lorenn.